Good evening and welcome to the Washington Week Extra. I'm Yamiche El-Sendor. On Tuesday, President Biden signed the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act into law. For the first time in U.S. history, the law makes lynching a federal hate crime.
The law is not just about the past, it's about the present and our future as well. Hate never goes away, it only hides. It hides under the rocks. Given just a little bit of oxygen, it comes roaring back out, screaming. But what stops it is all of us, not a few. All of us have to stop it.
The bill is named after Emmett Till. He was a 14-year-old black boy who was brutally murdered by a group of white men in Mississippi in 1955. His mother's courageous decision to have an open casket funeral for him made a huge impact on the fight for civil rights because people got to see, of course, up close the impact of that murder. Joining me tonight to discuss this and more, Tremaine Lee. He is a correspondent for MSNBC and the host of the Into America podcast. And back with me still is Michael Shear, White House correspondent for the New York Times. Thank you both of you for being here. Tremaine, I want to start with you. We talked a little bit about who Emmett Till was, but you talked to his family. Tell us a little bit more about who Emmett Till was and why it's so important that this bill was named after him.
Yeah, Manish, the name Emmett Till is kind of seared in our collective memory, at least in our community, as an unwilling martyr, a 14-year-old boy from Chicago visiting family in Mississippi when he made the mistake of whistling at a white woman. And that ended up getting him killed. But not just killed, he was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered, right? His deaths really sparked the modern day civil rights movement. And so all these years later, 65 years later, even though his name rings clear, right, rings loud, we understand who Emmett Till was, his name being on this legislation means that the justice that he didn't get in life, no one was ever held accountable for his murder, that perhaps moving in the future, that people will be able to be held accountable under this law, right? So his name, Emmett Till, we know, but now it will be emblazoned forever in this legislation, and hopefully, moving forward, it'll stand for justice, not just the manner in which he died.
And you talked to a member of Emmett Till's family for your upcoming podcast. I can't wait to listen to that episode. What's your biggest takeaway from that conversation? What sticks with you?
Yeah, I spoke to the Reverend Wheeler Parker, who was an older cousin of Emmett Till's, who was actually there the night he was kidnapped. And I think the first thing that stands out to me is that when we think about the so-called bad old days when black folks were being lynched across this country with impunity, it seems like some distant memory. But there are people living with us today who had family members who were lynched, who were witnesses of lynching. And so I think the idea that the gap between now and then is much smaller than we can imagine, but also the pain still being carried by this family all of these years later, to hear the pain in his voice still and look in his eyes and to hear him tell the story about Emmett Till's kidnapping and murder, it just gives you a heavy heart.
It's a heavy heart. It's absolutely a heavy heart. And Tremaine, one more question for you, because this bill comes after 100 years of trying, 200 failed attempts. What do you think made this moment different and made this bill be able to be passed?
I think you have a number of things. I don't think it's lost on anyone that Joe Biden is thinking about history. When he said that he'd have the backs of black folks, many people across the country are waiting for those signs. But I think Ketanji Brown Jackson's appointment to the Supreme Court, tapping Kamala Harris, I think this is another one of those signposts that Joe Biden is trying to make his mark on history. But certainly the tenor and tone of the last several years in this country and the racial reckoning and arriving at this moment now where the soil is ripe for change, right? People have a dialogue and a language around some of these racial disparities. I think after 200 failed attempts, we arrive at this moment. But I think it only took 200 because of the white supremacy still baked into our politics, right? To a vote for this bill many years ago, would have been undermining the white supremacist impulses of a lot of people across this country, especially those in the South. So we arrived at this moment after 200 attempts in 100 years. I think it's certainly a sign of progress in this country.
Michael, jump in here. You were nodding both when Tremaine was talking about sort of the impact of this, but also the political calculations, the political decisions being made by the White House.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with the question of Biden and his legacy. I mean, the president came in to office absolutely determined to be, to be a leader on some of these issues. He's talked about equity from the beginning. Obviously, the decisions that have already been mentioned about selecting the first African American, vice president, et cetera. I guess I would offer a little bit of cynicism, though. I mean, I'm a reporter, that's what I do. In some ways, I think there is so much work to be done on other issues that really, truly are central to, to Black life in America, whether it be voting rights, whether it be prison reform, sentencing reform. And I wonder if in some ways this wasn't a sort of easier vote for people to take, right? I mean, I think only 3 members of the House voted against it. I think it was nobody objected in the Senate to it. And so, I mean, that speaks in part to all of the things that were said about the moment that we're in, but it also may speak to a way in which this was kind of more of a symbolic vote. And really, I think the test is still in the future. Look at all of the things that, for example, the Republican Party hasn't been willing to let through that benefit the country, but also in particular the black community speaks to how far we have yet to go. This is one piece of legislation. I think folks are happy that it's done, but there's a lot left.
Well, speaking with you, Michael, there is this sense when I talk to White House officials that they realize that they're going to be called to account to say, okay, what laws, what did you pass specifically to improve life for Black people who you're going to need to turn out in record numbers, not only to keep your job in 2024, President Biden, but also to win in 2022 in these midterms. What's your sense when you talk to White House officials about how concerned they are about voting rights and policing and just the ability to make the case to Black people to turn out in big numbers?
Look, I mean, I think it depends whether you're talking to them on the record or off the record, right?
We want the off the record stuff.
Right. I mean, on the record, they will cite a litany of things that that are part of the president's record to date, and I think they will say that they believe that the president and his party should get credit for taking those steps. I think privately there is concern that the gridlock in Washington has meant that on some big things that are important to the Black community, and there are issues that cross over, right? For example, college affordability is an issue that is broader than the Black community, but often hits the Black community particularly hard, and they haven't made any progress on that. On a lot of the issues that they failed to do on the his Build Back Better agenda, those are things I think privately that they worry that they're going to come to the midterm elections and then the 2024 reelect and not have a lot to show for it, and that the Black community will hold them accountable.
Yeah. And Tremaine, in thinking about sort of the current day issues that are going on, there's some that are going to wonder, why do you even need an anti-lynching bill in 2022? But then, of course, we have the case of Ahmaud Arbery and so many others that show that this lynching is not something that is in the past, it's something that could happen to people right now.
That's right. Well, first of all, I think people, when you think of lynching, you think a noose and a tree, right? But the organized murder based on hate, right? That's the lynching. And what this bill does, it expands the net of who can be held accountable for the conspiracy. In the case of Emmett Till, whistling at the white woman gins up her brother and her family members, and she's central to this. And so, in a current context, she would also be charged with murder. But when we see the level of hate and racism and white supremacy still coursing through the fabric of this country, there should be no surprise or concern why we still need an anti-lynching law. It's not just the grainy black and white photos. That's strange fruit, right? Strange fruit has taken many different forms today. We see it in the systemic kind of violence, but then certainly still the physical violence we see in a case like Ahmaud Arbery.
And sticking with this idea of strange fruit and what people are enduring, what do civil rights activists tell you that they hope this bill will change in this nation's mind? Because I was looking at some of the interview that you did with Emmett Till's family member, and they talked about the fact that you can legislate on paper, but that you also can't really change, in some ways at least, you can't change people's hearts and the way that people view other people.
I think our colleague said it well a few minutes ago. This is largely symbolic, and that's what I meant when I said that it's not lost on Joe Biden. History is not lost on him, and so by putting this mark, you're going to see this in the history book. It's a good faith show that they're willing to put their money where their mouth is, symbolically at least. But I don't think it's lost on any of the activists across this country who I've talked to, who say that there is a need for substantive reform in this country, but that the baseline in America is anti-blackness. There's a certain level of suffering or hurt or disenfranchisement or caging in jails or shooting by police or all kinds of forms of violence heaped on the community that is accepted in this country. And so the same way that Ketanji Brown Jackson is actually progress and it looks great, will that substantively change the lives of black folks? Having a VP Kamala Harris, will that substantively change? Unless you get some teeth behind legislation around protecting the franchise for folks and so many other issues across this country, it'll be a nice little sign to hang on your legacy, but little more.
Yeah, those are all key questions, Tremaine. Sort of what is going to be the actual impact of what could be the symbolism of all sorts of things. Even some would say the first black president, the first black VP, the first Supreme Court nominee. All that is great, but it needs to also be tied with the idea that everyday African Americans need to be able to live and flourish in their communities without being scared of being racially profiled. So much we could talk about. I'll have to leave it there tonight, but thank you so much to Tremaine and to Michael for sharing your reporting and for joining us. And I'm Yamiche Alcindor, of course. Good night from Washington.